They say you never really know someone until you share an inheritance with them. In my case, it took my mother's death to show me who my brother truly was, and it wasn't the person I thought I'd grown up with. I'm Emily, and for the past 15 years, I've been my mother's primary caregiver. When she was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at 58, I didn't hesitate. I sold my apartment in the city, quit my promising career as an architect, and moved back into my childhood home. My brother Marcus, ever the successful businessman, called me crazy. "You're throwing your life away," he said during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "We can hire someone to take care of Mom. You don't have to sacrifice everything." But it wasn't a sacrifice to me. Mom had raised us single-handedly after Dad died when we were kids. She'd worked 2 jobs, somehow never missing a single school event or birthday. Now it was my turn to be there for her. The first few years weren't too bad. Mom was mostly herself, just more forgetful. We'd laugh about the little things, finding her keys in the refrigerator or her reading glasses in the sugar bowl. We developed a routine, morning walks in the garden she loved so much, afternoon tea with her favorite cookies, and evenings spent looking through old photo albums, helping her remember. Marcus visited occasionally, usually around Christmas or Mom's birthday. He'd sweep in with expensive gifts and grand stories about his latest business ventures, but he never stayed longer than a few hours. "I have meetings," he'd say, checking his Rolex. "You understand, right, Em?" I did understand, but not in the way he meant. I understood that my brother had chosen a different path, one that left little room for family obligations. That was fine. We all make our choices. I made mine, and I didn't regret it. As Mom's condition worsened, our world grew smaller. The vibrant, energetic woman who'd raised us began to fade. Some days she didn't recognize me at all, calling me by her sister's name or treating me like a stranger in her house. Those were the hardest days, watching confusion and fear cloud her eyes when I tried to help her shower or take her medication. "I want my daughter," she'd cry sometimes, looking right through me. "Where's my Emily?" "I'm here, Mom," I'd say, fighting back tears. "I'm right here." The financial strain was significant but manageable. Mom's pension and savings covered most of our needs, and I'd started a small online business designing houseplants from home. It wasn't the career I dreamed of, but it allowed me to be there for her 24/7. Marcus sent money occasionally, generous checks that arrived with brief notes. "From Mom's care. Hope this helps." I deposit the checks and sent him detailed updates about Mom's condition, her medications, her good days and bad. His responses when they came were always the same. "Thanks for handling everything, Em. You're an angel." Then came the fall. I just helped Mom into bed when she suddenly became agitated, insisting she needed to go to work. "I'm late," she kept saying, trying to get up. The children need their teacher. She hadn't taught elementary school in over 20 years, but in her mind she was late for morning classes. I tried to calm her, but she pushed past me, surprisingly strong in her confusion. She made it halfway down the stairs before her slipper caught on the carpet. I reached for her, but I was too late. The sound of her falling still haunts my nightmares. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights and grave-faced doctors. "Broken hip," they said. "Surgery needed." High risk at her age and with her condition. I called Marcus immediately. "I'll be there as soon as I can," he promised. "Just finishing up a big merger." He'd arrived 3 days later, after the surgery, after Mom had already been moved to a private room. He looked immaculate in his tailored suit, not a hair out of place, while I sat there in the same wrinkled clothes I'd been wearing since the admission. "You look terrible," were his first words to me. "When was the last time you slept?" I couldn't remember. The days had blurred together in a haze of hospital corridors and medical consultations. Mom had developed pneumonia after the surgery, a common complication they said, but potentially deadly in her weakened state. Marcus stayed for 2 days, mostly spending time on his phone in the hospital cafeteria while I sat with Mom. Before he left, he pulled me aside. "Listen, Em," he said, his voice taking on that reasonable tone I'd grown to dread. "Maybe it's time we think about a care facility. The best one, of course. Money's no object." I stared at him, too tired to be angry. "She's not going to a nursing home, Marcus. She made me promise years ago. No matter what happened, she wanted to stay in her house." "That was before," he argued. "She's getting worse. You can't handle this alone anymore." "I'm not alone," I said. "I have help." It was true. I finally hired a part-time nurse to assist with the more challenging aspects of Mom's care. Sandra came 4 hours each day, giving me time to work on my designs and catch up on sleep. Marcus threw up his hands in that dismissive way of his. Fine, it's your life to waste. He left that afternoon, back to his meetings and mergers and expensive city apartment. Mom recovered, slowly. We brought her home after 3 weeks, but she was different. The fall had accelerated her decline dramatically. She stopped recognizing me completely, living entirely in a world of decades-old memories. She'd ask for her mother, long dead, or call out for Dad as if he just left the room. That's when I installed the cameras. Sandra, our nurse, suggested it after Mom had tried to leave the house at midnight, convinced she needed to pick us up from school. Nothing fancy, just basic security cameras in the main areas of the house, connected to an app on my phone. They gave me peace of mind during the brief periods when I had to leave Mom with Sandra or sleep in my own room. The next 2 years passed in a fog of caregiving routines. Marcus's visits became even rarer, though the checks kept coming. Then 6 months ago, Mom took a turn for the worse. The doctors prepared me for the end, but nothing really prepares you for losing your mother. She passed peacefully in her sleep in her own bed, just as she'd wanted. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath, telling her about the roses blooming in her garden. Marcus arrived the next morning, this time with his lawyer in tow. I should have known then that something was wrong, but grief has a way of dulling your instincts. I was too busy dealing with funeral arrangements and the endless paperwork that follows a death to notice my brother's sudden keen interest in Mom's legal affairs. The bombshell dropped 3 days after the funeral in the office of Mom's longtime lawyer, Mr. Peterson. I sat there in my black dress, still numb with grief, while Marcus lounged in his chair with an expression I hadn't seen since we were kids, the same smug look he'd worn when he'd blamed me for breaking something he'd actually broken. Before we proceed with the reading, Marcus said, pulling a document from his briefcase, "There's something you should know. Mom made some changes to her will in her final months." Mr. Peterson frowned, reaching for the paper Marcus held out. I wasn't aware of any changes. Mrs. Bennett never contacted me about revising her will. She used my lawyer, Marcus explained smoothly. She wanted to keep it private until now. I watched in growing disbelief as Mr. Peterson reviewed the document. It was a new will, dated just 2 months ago, leaving everything, the house, Mom's savings, even her personal belongings, to Marcus. Everything except a small trust fund that had been set up for me years ago. "This is impossible," I whispered, but Marcus just smiled that cold, superior smile. "Mom changed her mind about a lot of things near the end," he said. "She realized it wasn't fair to leave everything to you just because you chose to stay home. After all, I contributed financially all these years." The room started spinning. Mr. Peterson was saying something about needing to verify the document's authenticity, but I barely heard him. 15 years of my life, dedicated to caring for our mother, and Marcus was trying to take everything, not just the material possessions, but the validation of those years of sacrifice. Then I remembered something that made my heart start beating faster. "I need my laptop," I said quietly, interrupting whatever legal point Marcus's lawyer was making. "There's something you all need to see." Marcus's lawyer started to object, but I was already pulling out my laptop. My hands trembled slightly as I logged into the security camera app. 15 years of being the good sister, the selfless one, the pushover. It all ended today. "What exactly are we supposed to be looking at?" Marcus asked, his voice dripping with condescension. But I caught the slight edge of nervousness in his tone. My brother had always been good at hiding his tells, but I had a lifetime of practice reading them. 2 months ago, I said, keeping my voice steady as I pulled up the archive footage. "That's when you said Mom changed her will, right?" The timestamp on the video read 2:14 a.m., March 15th. The camera showed our living room, dimly lit by a single lamp. Mom was in her favorite armchair, dressed in her blue nightgown, staring vacantly at the wall. One of her bad nights when sleep wouldn't come. Then Marcus entered the frame. The room fell silent as we watched. Marcus on the screen moved with purpose, turning on more lights, setting up what looked like a small camera on the bookshelf. He was talking, but there was no audio. I hadn't seen the need for sound on the security cameras. "This proves nothing," Marcus's lawyer interjected. "A son visiting his mother late at night." I held up my hand. "Wait." The next part was harder to watch. Marcus on screen, kneeling in front of Mom, waving papers in front of her confused face. Mom's expression was vacant, uncomprehending. She was having one of her episodes. I recognized the signs immediately. To anyone who didn't know better, she might have looked like she was paying attention. But I knew that empty stare. She wasn't there, not really. She was competent, Marcus snapped, but his face had gone pale. She knew exactly what she was signing. I switched to another camera angle, this one showing Mom's bedroom at 3:47 a.m. the same night. Marcus was there again, this time holding Mom's hand, guiding it across paper after paper. Her movements were mechanical, robotic. She could barely hold the pen. "Would you like to see the footage from the other nights?" I asked quietly. "You visited 5 times that month, always after midnight. Always when you knew Sandra's shift was over and I'd be asleep. Always on Mom's bad nights." Marcus's lawyer was already gathering his papers, a look of disgust evident on his face. Mr. Peterson had gone very still, his eyes fixed on the screen where the evidence of elder abuse played out in silent, damning detail. "You set me up," Marcus hissed, his composure finally cracking. "You planted those cameras to trap me." I closed the laptop, suddenly exhausted. The cameras were there to protect Mom from wandering off, from falling again. I never imagined I'd need to protect her from her own son. What followed was a blur of legal terms and procedures. Mr. Peterson immediately filed to have the fraudulent will invalidated. Marcus's lawyer quietly excused himself from the case. And my brother, my only brother, stormed out of the office without looking back. Mom's original will was simple and clear. The house would go to me, along with most of her assets, in recognition of my years as her caregiver. Marcus would receive a generous portion of her savings and some family heirlooms. It was fair, it was what she wanted, and now it would be honored. But the victory felt hollow. That evening, I sat alone in Mom's garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The roses she loved so much were in full bloom, their fragrance filling the air. A text message lit up my phone. "Marcus, of course. You've ruined everything," it read. "I hope you're happy." I thought about responding, about pointing out that he'd ruined things himself, that his greed had destroyed our last chance at being a real family. Instead, I blocked his number. The next few weeks brought changes. Marcus's lawyer reached out with a settlement offer. He'd drop all claims to the estate in exchange for me not pursuing criminal charges for elder abuse. I agreed, not for his sake, but because I couldn't bear the thought of dragging Mom's memory through a criminal investigation. Sandra, our nurse, cried when I told her what had happened. I should have noticed something, she kept saying, but I assured her it wasn't her fault. Marcus had been careful, calculating. He'd known exactly when to strike. I kept the house, of course. Some suggested I sell it, start fresh somewhere else. But this place held more than just memories of Mom's illness. It held memories of her strength, her love, her laughter. The garden she tended even in her confused days, the kitchen where she taught me to bake, the living room where we'd spent countless hours looking through photo albums, trying to hold onto her memories as long as we could. The security cameras came down, their job done. I donated Mom's clothes to charity, but kept her favorite sweater, the soft blue one she'd worn on good days. Her jewelry went into a special box, to be passed down someday, perhaps to a daughter of my own. Life settled into a new rhythm. I threw myself back into my architecture work, this time taking on bigger projects. The skills I developed designing house plans from home had given me a unique perspective that clients appreciated. Within months, I had more work than I could handle. Then came the package. It arrived 6 months after Mom's death, forwarded from Marcus's old office. Inside was a collection of childhood photos I'd never seen before. Mom with us at the beach, at school plays, at Little League games. Happy moments captured in fading color. At the bottom of the box was a note in Marcus's handwriting. "I found these in my old desk. They belong with you now. I'm sorry." I sat there for a long time, looking at those photos, remembering the brother I'd grown up with before money and ambition had changed him. The little boy who'd helped me build sandcastles, who'd defended me from bullies, who'd held my hand at Dad's funeral. I didn't respond to his note. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. But I added the photos to Mom's albums, filling in pieces of our family history that had almost been lost. A year has passed since then. The garden still blooms, though I'm not as good at tending it as Mom was. I've turned the downstairs guest room into a home office where I design homes for other families while surrounded by memories of my own. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I think I catch a whiff of Mom's perfume in the hallway or hear the echo of her laugh. The house holds her spirit, not in the sad, confused days of her illness, but in the vibrant, loving years that came before. Marcus never reached out again after that package of photos. Last I heard, he'd moved to the West Coast to start a new business venture. Part of me hopes he's found peace, or at least learned something from what happened. Another part of me knows that some people never change. As for me, I've found my own kind of peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting or forgiving, but the kind that comes from knowing I did right by Mom until the very end. She may not have remembered who I was in her final years, but I never forgot who she was or what she taught us about love, sacrifice, and doing what's right. The security cameras are gone, but I kept one small memento from that whole ordeal. A single frame from the footage, showing Mom in her favorite chair, bathed in soft lamplight. Not from that terrible night, but from an ordinary evening months before. In the image, she's smiling at something off camera, a moment of clarity in the midst of her confusion. I keep it to remind myself that sometimes the truth comes to light in unexpected ways, and that justice, while not always swift, has a way of finding its path. They say you never really know someone until you share an inheritance with them. But I've learned that you also never really know your own strength until you're forced to stand up for what's right. Mom taught me that, in her own way, through years of quiet sacrifice and unwavering love. And in the end, that's the only inheritance that truly matters.